When you say nation, you talk about land. Our land is Africa. That's undeniable. This land is not our land.
That what Frantz Fanon's theory, psychological theory, is that we're in a post-colonial psychology. And what he calls that is an auto-destructional stage, which is the oppressor will oppress for so long that the oppressed no longer have to be physically oppressed. They do it to themselves automatically.
I'm black. Do you hear me, man? Do you understand? I am black. I'm a nigga. Do you understand me? I was born black, I live black, and I'm gonna die probably because I'm black. Because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
Hey man, it's like this, man. It's like, you know, it's like it's revolution time, man. There's no questions asked. Revolution is here. You know what I'm saying? We the youth, we the young. It's time for us to break loose, you know? We don't have no freedom, no rights, man. We slaves right now. Everybody's still a slave. That's what they told us today. In other words, you still a slave. No matter how much money you got, you still ain't shit. So, you know, it's on, just like that. Just like
are really ready and willing to pay the price that is necessary for freedom. Our people will always be walking around here second-class citizens, or what you call 20th century slaves.
What price are you talking about, sir?
The price of freedom is death.
What's the figure?
I mean, what are you in this for? You want power, you want revenge, you know? What is it?
It's simple, Willie. I just want to be free.
That's right. I just want Uhuru. Hey, peace to the family, Uhuru, to brothers, sisters, comrades tuning in. This is the first session of a series of studies that I'm going to do around Black-on-Black violence, Dr. Amos N. Wilson's Black-on-Black violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation and Service of White Domination. This book right here, had it for years, a little worn through, but I think it's an important text, especially when we're continually dealing with horizontal violence, which is a consequence of our colonial conditions. In essence, the system is instigating the horizontal violence that takes place within our community. And you'll hear me use horizontal violence or intercommunal violence when referencing or referring to Black-on-Black violence. But you may hear me say Black-on-Black violence because it is the title of the book. But we know that to say Black-on-Black violence, it has this connotation that what takes place, the violence that takes place in the Black community that's perpetrated on one another is some sort of unique or singular phenomenon that it doesn't exist in other communities. But intercommunal violence happens at a higher rate in all communities, at a higher rate than violence from people who are outside of that community. But with that being said, there still is an issue that needs to be addressed within the African community. And we're going to get to it because this isn't just a study to look at the problem within the Black community and just discuss the issue, but let's identify the problem and let's talk about ways that we can overturn the issue. But to overturn it and to really solve the problem that we deal with as African people under this system is to rid ourselves of this colonial relationship, is to get free, to have the right to self-determination, because what we're going to find out from reading this book, and there's other studies that we can look at as well, but the theme throughout this book is how the social environment itself is the root to the criminality, quote unquote criminality within the Black community. The criminal under the social system, within the social system, was created by the designers of the social system. So with that being said, before we even get into the book, though, I'm going to play a clip from Dr. Amos N. Wilson. So I'm going to share my screen. And after we listen to some of Dr. Amos N. Wilson and get energized from our Baba Wilson, we'll go into this book. And I have a few announcements as well that I'll get to in a minute. But right now, I'm going to ask everybody to like and share the podcast, share it on your platforms, to your friends, to your family, because the more people that we have studying the issue, the more people that will have to put in their minds together to develop solutions to the problems that we have in the African community. So let me share my screen at this present time. Also, if this is your first time here, make sure that you subscribe to our channel.
The efforts that you're making there, Brother Maddox, in terms of developing a very important and needed institution in our community. It's interesting that I found that many of us who are nationalists and nationalistic in orientation, of course, think along parallel lines, and we have a certain kind of rhythm, because let's see, since I left you the last time, I've been fully engaged in developing my manual for power. You remember when I was there the last time, I said that I would do about 10 weeks of seminars on power and how power is to be achieved and developed. I'm on the last lecture now, so we'll be pretty soon we'll be ready to produce the seminars. A major part of those seminars, I decided I'd write out the lectures first, so that's why I postponed them until I finished the lectures. Because I looked at power and a number of its bases, its economic bases, cultural bases, how it's based and related to the family, and in a number of other ways, so that we can be very clear as to how we can develop power and use that power in our interests as a people. One of the longer sections that I worked on had to do with the think tanks and the role of think tanks in the organization of power. In fact, I reviewed quite a few of the think tanks used by the ruling class in this country. And as a part of the seminars, we will go over those think tanks, look at how they operate, what role they play in the society, how they form a major part, in fact, the central part of the ruling class policy formation network and the ideology formation network. How you move from the think tank into the universities, into the seminars, float the ideas into the media, use the think tanks to create expertise, and get the experts located in the government so that they actually begin to turn ideology into policy. I deal then with power, of course. I deal with it not from the point of view of how we are victimized by it, but how we ourselves are going to use it in our interests and use it in a positive manner. So a good deal of the lecture deals with how we ourselves will organize our think tanks and how those tanks are related to the network of structures in the African American community. We are looking at Chancellor Williams' master plan and using that to bounce off of in terms of ultimately creating a nation within a nation. And based on the concept of nation within a nation, we want to create the kind of organizations that would permit us to overthrow the European nations and the European systems. You must keep that in mind. If that's not your goal, you're not about power. If that is not your goal, you're really not about education. You see, what do I say? The function of education, first and foremost, is to maintain the biological survival of a people and to advance their interests, to defend their interests and their very lives, and to enhance their quality of life. If your education does not function in those terms, then it is miseducation. It does not matter how much knowledge you have accumulated, how competent you are in terms of your skills and so forth. If you're not able to defend your very biological life, to defend the life of your people and advance their interests, then we have been miseducated. See, and we have to recognize one thing you see here, as I spoke earlier today, about the ideology of individualism, where, and a part of that ideology has thinking of education as individual salvation, and has us thinking that education basically is primarily functional for the individual to get a job, for the individual to qualify. So each of us is going to make his or her own individual contract with the system that dominates us. Each one of us then thinks that we can engage in individual salvation. This is destructive and will lead to the destruction of African American people and African people. We will die with tremendous amounts of knowledge and skills in our heads. If those skills and if the knowledge is not coordinated and combined in the sense of nation and in the sense of peoplehood, no amount of individual accumulation and knowledge and skills will save us as a people. It is only when that accumulated knowledge and the accumulated skills that we have are coordinated under the banner of nationhood and peoplehood will we then save ourselves as a people, and we will be saved individually as persons. We must keep this in mind. So it's a good thing that we're doing the think tank here. It's a good thing that shortly thereafter, I think my own work and the work of those who support me will be out supportive of that idea. I just want to announce quickly here that Brother Monk is back there with a few of the books. If you care for any of them, those of you who are not familiar with what we're doing here, you have to recognize we now have 4 books out: The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children, Understanding Black Adolescent Male Violence, which is a companion book to Black on Black violence. We are trying to put together here then a set of books that are connected one with the other. These books are not being published individually, they're really being published as a unit, so that we'll be able to move from childhood as in the developmental psychology of the Black child right to the book that will be published later on in the fall, Educating Black Children for the 21st Century. Thank you. This evening, we're going to talk a brief bit about education and a little bit about so-called special ed, even though I'm not going to go into detail about that at all. I'm going to sort of use learning disabilities as sort of a paradigm in terms of education. I try to urge people when we talk about the problems that confront us, that we must talk about them within the context in which they occur. It's very important that we begin at the beginning. Too often people begin to discuss problems and issues too late in the sequential chain of events, you see. Instead of starting at the beginning, they will start on the 3rd or 4th link. And despite their good intentions and so forth, they will often arrive at the wrong conclusion because they have not started at the right beginning here. As I have pointed out in other assemblies, we must start with the fact that we are a dominated people. That's very important that we keep this in mind. I'm beginning to urge now that we start to discuss domination and the psychology of domination. And we focus focus on that because it will permit us to see many problems and issues and to predict many events in the future. I suggest that we engage in that before we engage in the discussion of racism, because racism is a secondary quality of domination. It is an instrument of domination. The first thing is the desire to dominate. The second thing is then to choose the instruments of domination, of which racism is but one. There are a number of instruments of domination, and we're going to go through those in our seminars in terms of the various forms of domination and the various means by which domination is attained and maintained. Look at domination. Recognize that I've said in other assemblies that domination is a social problem. When you say that you have dominated or that we have dominated as a people, we are saying that we have a problem. You cannot be dominated without having a problem. You cannot be, as we are, dependent on another people the way we are at this point without having problems.
Hey, I don't want to get too caught up in the video. Dr. Amos Wilson is going in right now. Let's do this. Yeah, Dr. Wilson is going in right now. Social problem. And I'm going to come back to this social problem again, because depending on the position and the lens that you're looking at the world in, looking at human relations in, is going to determine how you see the problem and the solution to the problem. And historically, the European has seen African people within their society as a problem. And so they're coming up with solutions to solve what they consider a social ill, but they'll never indict the social system as the source of that problem. And when you're looking at the people who are being dominated, when they're looking at the position that they're in and the social ills that exist within their community, we do not need to be looking at it through the lens of the people who are creating these problems. We need to be looking at it through the lens of people who are victims of the source of the problem. And so when we come up with solutions, we begin to look at the source, the people who are the origin of all of the issues that we're all of the issues and problems that we're facing. And we know that we need to separate ourselves from the source of the problem, or we need to wipe out the problem altogether. However you want to look at that, but we need to overturn that relationship that we have with the problem. And so we can come up with many different methods to get rid of this problem. And that has to be a conversation we have among ourselves. So that goes to what we're talking about with intercommunal violence, black on black violence, which I'm going to get into right now. But before I do that, what I want to do is I'm going to share a link. Baba Sekou Odinga, who was just in the hospital and is seeking some resources and some relief from the community, him and his family. I want to put a link to Baba Sekou Odinga's GoFundMe page, and hopefully most of us are familiar with who Baba Sekou Odinga. Baba Sekou Odinga is, who was a former member of Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, political prisoner, did decades behind the wall as a result of him fighting for the liberation of African people. So this goes back to the criminal, what we're talking about within the system of colonialism. Under the system of colonialism, the criminal is anybody that has not adjusted to the system of colonialism, to the ruling classes' mores, to the ruling classes' value system, to their norms. When you go against that and you represent a threat to the status quo, what happens is you become a criminal within that society. But what we'll see in this book, though, the criminal for the colonized, for the enslaved, is the European who committed the criminal act when he enslaved African people and stole indigenous land, right? And so this is why social context is important when we're talking about criminality, and we're going to get into that in this book. But I put the link to Baba Sekou Odinga's GoFundMe. Definitely, if you have the resources, anything that you can spare to support our freedom fighter, make sure you click on that link and show your support. I also want to highlight what's happening this week in Brooklyn. I'm going to share my screen and share the flyer. There's the Curve Fest for political prisoners in Brooklyn, New York. Let me share my screen. So if you're in Brooklyn or in the area, or maybe you want to travel to Brooklyn to show your support for political prisoners, Curve Fest is meant to highlight our political prisoners and what they're going through and ways that we can support them. So this is Curve Fest for political prisoners, Saturday, September 16th. That's this Saturday at 406 Utica Avenue. You can also go to We Charge Colonialism, our social media platform, to see the same flyer and get information on the location. But it's going to be in front of the Ujamaa Health Food Store in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Again, that's happening this Saturday. Free all political prisoners. I'm going to share another thing that's taking place this Saturday. If you're in Philadelphia, if you're in the Philadelphia area and you want to come out to the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace, the Uhuru Book Fair is happening this Saturday in Philadelphia. Give me a second and I'll share that. It's going to be at Clark Park in West Philadelphia at 43rd and Chester. One African, One Nation, Uhuru Book Fair and Marketplace. The chairman, Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, is going to be the keynote speaker out there. There's going to be a whole lot of performances, book readings, and there's going to be somewhere close to 100 vendors out there. So come out and support Black businesses and the Black community. It's going to be children's activities as well out there. So it's definitely going to be a family type environment. So make sure you come out and you support the vendors and be a part of this amazing marketplace, the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace, Uhuru Book Fair. And last but not least, let me share one more thing with you all, and then we're going to get into this book. Make sure I got it here. Next Sunday in Brooklyn, back in Brooklyn. I'm traveling. I go back and forth. I'm in Philadelphia. I'm in Brooklyn. And if you got something going on, I'm where you are too, if it's about liberation of our people. Next Sunday in Brooklyn at the Brownsville Heritage House. That's the home base right there, Brownsville Heritage House. And shout out to Sister Miriam, who has been holding that the Brownsville Heritage House and keeping that alive for years now. We have the African Charged Genocide Reparations Now. We're going to have Councilman Charles Barron, who's going to be speaking there. The Chairman Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, who just came out with his book, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now. Is going to be talking about the book and also hands off Uhuru, the recent attacks on the entire Uhuru movement. So he'll be speaking about that. That's in Brooklyn, New York, and Brownsville, in the heart of the African community there. So hopefully, I'll see you guys at any of these events, or if you're in the area. So with that being said, I want to get back to the book today, but I'm gonna put Baba on the screen as I'm reading through this book. I was getting worried. I thought I was on mute for a second all that time. I was about to say I did all that talking. So let me get into this book right now. This is Black on Black Violence, Dr. Amos N. Wilson, and I'm reading from chapter 1, The Sociopolitical Necessity of Black Criminality. And so I'll be reading and discussing what Dr. Amos N. Wilson is exploring. But the first thing he starts off with is a quote by Michael Lewis from The Culture of Inequality, which is a book that I want to encourage people to pick up. Anytime there's a reference to a book by Dr. Amos N. Wilson, I like to get into their mind and what they're reading as well, so we can see what they're interpreting. So I want to encourage everybody to do the same. This quote by Michael Lewis, he says, "I would maintain that some of those conditions which we facetly regard as problematic, and by implication those which nearly everyone would like to remedy, may nevertheless be necessary conditions in American life. Put another way, while these conditions may be troublesome, they certainly injure many people. Their existence is culturally mandated, and they are intrinsic to the very essence of American society." And so I'm going to go to this text. This text is Understanding Social Problems. It's a text I use for a class I taught to. But the reason I'm going to is because it breaks down very briefly some sociological theories. And it sort of connects to where Michael Lewis is coming from in regards to criminality serves a purpose within the colonial society, right? And so the maintenance of or the sustaining of criminality in colonial society is a necessity, right? And when we look at what purpose does it serve, it's spoken about a little bit in this book. Just some examples of how criminality can serve a purpose. But let me read this part first. Sociological theories of crime. Some explanations of crime focus on psychological aspects of the offenders, such as psychopathic personalities, unhealthy relationships with parents, and mental illnesses. And this is what the colonizer does to sort of remove their culpability in the criminality that exists within the Black community. Right? They shift the blame. There must be something. They center the individual and even the families. Sometimes they center the families when it comes to why this criminal element exists within the Black community. So other crime theories focus on the role of biological variables, such as central nervous systems, multifunctioning stress human hormones, vitamins or mineral deficiencies, chromosomal abnormalities, and a genetic predisposition towards aggression. Sociological theories of crime and violence emphasize the role of social forces in criminal behavior and societal responses to it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to wear these. I broke my glasses, but I'm gonna have trouble reading without them. But the point here is the sociological theories, though, of crime is looking at the system itself. But what we have with the colonizer, he's going to look at some sort of psychological defunct or something biological, right? There's something innate about these people that causes them to act in a certain way. And I'm going to go to a history. I'm going to show you a history of this type of thinking from the colonizer that is prevalent amongst the when I say the colonizer, I'm talking about these Europeans and Euro-American people when I'm talking about the colonizer. And so let me read this to show you the connection to with this quote I just read in Dr. Amos N. Wilson's book, Structural Functionalist Perspective. According to Durkheim, another European thinker, German guy, and Durkheim, for those, some of you may be familiar, but Durkheim is who influenced Huey P. Newton's idea of revolutionary suicide. Huey P. Newton was reading Durkheim and Durkheim's theory on suicide and was influenced by that when he wrote revolutionary suicide, or at least came up with the concept of revolutionary suicide. So according to Durkheim and other structural functionalists, crime is functional for society. One of the functions of crime and other deviant behaviors is that it strengthens group cohesion. The deviant individual violates rules of conduct that the rest of the community holds in high respect. And when these people come together to express their outrages over the offense, they develop a tighter bond of solidarity then existed earlier. So that right there, think about, remember the lynchings, when the lynchings took place of African people in this country during the Jim Crow era. Remember, you would see those pictures, if any of you saw the pictures of these lynchings, there would be this commercial, there would be thousands of people out there, 5,000, 10,000 people who would come to witness a lynching, right? Of this African who was said to commit some sort of criminal act. Usually this lynching would come because this African was supposed to had raped or sexually abused some white woman, right? And so now the community is in outrage, but it was some sort of criminal act that was committed by the African in America that will bring these colonizers, this white community together, right? And they would share this bond they would share this bond over the execution of this African. But this is a purpose that criminality serves. When they look at the Black community and say to themselves, we have to come together so we can protect ourselves against this dangerous element within our society. And when I'm talking about the whole society, the European society, because Black people represent an element within this white dominated society. Because the dominant society is the white society, and we're going to get into that as I go further into this reading. But let me read this next paragraph, and I'll go back to the book. Crimes can also lead to social change. For example, an episode of local violence may achieve broad improvements in city services, be a catalyst for making public agencies more effective and responsive, for strengthening families and social institutions, and for creating public-private partnerships. Among all those structural functionalists, as a theoretical perspective deals directly with some aspects of crime, it is not a theory of crime per se. Three major theories of crime have developed from structural functionalists, and however, the first, called strain theory, was developed by Robert Merton and uses Durkheim's concept of anomie or normlessness. I'm gonna stop there. And the strain theory is interesting. I may come to that at another time, but the strain theory talks about the strain that society puts on a person when they're not able to fulfill certain roles within society. The society says you need to go to school and get a diploma and a degree, and when you can't, when there's obstacles that's keeping you from doing that, that is considered a strain. And because of the strain, you're not able to fulfill the expectations that society has placed on you. You may revert to a life of crime. That's just one example. There's other examples too of strains, but I just wanted to give some clarity on what's being spoken about there. So Dr. Wilson, let's go into this. So most commentators, expert and non-expert, who purport to explain the vicissitudes of criminality begin with the a priori assumption that criminal behavior by definition and nature is antisocial. That is, that criminals as deviants and the criminal activities that perpetrate in service to their own self-centered ends are determined to seriously derange the peace and orderly functions of society, to do grievous harms to the lives and liberties of its law-abiding members, and in some instances to destroy them. Criminals and criminality together are seen as constituting an alien and malignant cancerous growth, invading, attacking, and eating away the vital substance of the benign body of politics. The unexamined assumption that criminality and criminal activities are initiated and sustained by a distinct outlaw class of criminal personalities who are at war against a society of innocent, decent, normal persons while beguiling simple and direct is nevertheless disingenuous. Purported criminal types or classes, degrees or levels of criminal activities, as well as the social strata or group of individuals who perpetrate, aid, and abet criminal activities, functionally vary across time and cultures. This pointedly indicates that criminals and criminality, however they may be measured or described, are socio-cultural products. They carry and express the socio-genetic inheritance of their societal progenitor. Crime and society are blood relatives. They are intimately and inextricably related. Criminal personalities, like all personalities, are to a significant degree socially created and defined. Their behavioral characters can only be manifested within a social context. They therefore cannot stand outside social time, place, and circumstance. When a society collectively looks into the faces of its criminals, it looks in the mirror and sees a reflection of its own likeness. As the nature of society changes, so does the nature of their epiphenomenal criminality and the behavioral personalities of their criminal constituents. Neither criminality nor criminal personalities can exist in the absence of a social milieu. And that social milieu is the social environment that Dr. Amos N. Wilson is talking about. And so in essence, what Dr. Wilson is getting to right here is that the criminal, what is considered criminal within the society, is going to change depending on it's going to change throughout time as a result of the changes that take place in society. So when he says epiphenomenon, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this phenomena of change in society goes hand in hand. Well, the change in criminality, what's considered crime, goes hand in hand with the change that takes place within society. Those two are inextricably linked. So what is considered criminal today may not have been considered criminal 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, he always says that the laws of society, the ruling class, how does he put it? Is the opinions of the ruling class. The laws of society are the opinions of the ruling class, right? And so they have been dictating who and what is considered criminal in society. And when I say they, I'm talking about the colonizer. Now, there has been some resistance to what is considered criminal so that the actions of the colonized, so that they can have more liberty and freedom in regards to their movement and what they can do within the colonial society. And so what happens is that there's sometimes some compromise that is made between the colonized and the colonizer. But the colonized, these reforms that take place is always to the benefit of the colonizer, because they're saying, hey, if we don't make some concessions, it could lead to rebellion. Slavery is this fear of African people under slavery, rebelling against the slavery, had a segment of society saying, hey, you know, this system isn't viable. And there was always that threat of resistance that had them debating on whether they should prolong slavery or not, right? And that's just one reason. Of course, there's other, reasons as well. but the resistance to Jim Crow, right? This resistance to Jim Crow with the civil rights movement caused a change in laws. It caused a change in the way that the ruling class, the way that the state, and the way that people are able to interact with the African or with the Black community in America, right? And we can look at in colonial situations as well. And when colonialism, when the colonizer decided on the African continent, it's decided to give up the reins of direct rule over African people, those concessions was made because there was still this domination of the material life of African people. And so they would make these concessions, but ultimately, going back to, I'm gonna circle back to why I started this, why I went down this path. What was considered criminal, and let me move this. Move that. What was considered criminal at one time in regards to the behavior of Black people isn't considered criminal today, 50, 100 years ago. But there's still some actions among African people that are considered criminal, and even more, there's levels to even the punishment for crimes, right? Where there's this difference between how African people or Black people are being punished for the same crime that's committed by other groups of people, right? And that's because of the way that African people are viewed. There's something innate about African people, and they're criminal. There's this criminal element. There needs to be harsher penalties for them. For white people, for one, they represent the ruling class, and for two, there isn't this perception of white people as being criminals. So if there's a crime that's committed by their community, that's a deviation from the way that they truly are, from their nature. And so there's the way that they view it, there's more of an opportunity for reform. So we don't have to punish them as hard as we punish the other community. So hopefully this is making some sense. But this is what Dr. Amos N. Wilson is like really getting at with this connection with society and crime. And well, let's go into the next part. He says criminality as social symptoms. So criminality am I at this part? Yes, criminality may heuristically be perceived as a sociological symptom of a society. Not unlike an obsessive compulsion may be considered a psychological symptom of an individual, right? So criminality being a sociological symptom of society. It may furthermore be perceived in a classical Freudian sense as a maladjusted compromise between two or more conflicting forces within a social or societal personality which have not yet been completely integrated. Criminality as a society symptom represents a compromise between forces and needs in opposition. Forces repressive, and I'm going to pause for a second here, and I am going to ask that you pay attention closely to this point that I'm going to make. What we got going on here? Let me see what's up in the chat. Oh, yeah, revolution, suicide, indeed. Comrade Nkuleko Uhuru, he said criminalization seems like an ideological justification for domestic, let me put it up here, justification for domestic colonialism, just as racism was the ideological justification for imperialism. Powerful. Hello, fellow travelers. I'm taking a walk on the Black side. Wilson was a great contributor to the struggle. We'll always miss him. Indeed, I unite with that. Yeah, indeed. So I want y'all pay attention to this part right here, because he's going to talk about this dialectic between the criminal, or who's considered the criminal and who's not considered the criminal, like these opposing forces, right? He says criminality as a societal symptom represents a compromise between forces and needs in opposition. Forces repressive and repress, defensive and offensive, oppressive and oppressed, both seeking overt expression and satisfaction. Criminality as a symptom is connotative of societal imbalances, of internal sociological incompatibilities, of mutually exclusive inflations and deflations, of social needs being denied and distorted, right? The haves and the have-nots, right? This is why we need military. This is why this is why the colonizer needs military. This is why the colonizer needs the police and the state, right? Because of this contradiction that exists between the haves and the have-nots. Symptomatic criminality, while reflective of the societal whole, is incarnated and actualized in the minds and bodies of its individual and group constituents. It is emblematic of the societal misallocation of power, energy, and resources, of societal hypocrisy, of a societal refusal to know itself and be true to its reality and possibilities. Criminality as a symptom is inherently two-faced. It is both conservative and disruptive, enthroning and overthrowing. It serves two masters. It is a double agent, both serving and betraying. So who is criminality serving within our society, or within this society? Who is criminality serving and who is it not serving, right? Who is criminality serving, and what society is it disrupting? How is it showing up? And this is the point Dr. Amos N. Wilson is making here. He's saying, like, look at criminality from your position. And you have to determine from your own experience, through your own lens, what is considered criminal and who's committing the criminal acts. Psychoanalytically speaking, criminality as a societal neurotic symptom does not necessarily affect all segments of a society in the same way. For some, there are gains. For some, criminality, there are gains for it, both primary and secondary, and for others, there are losses. All right. The criminal activities of one or more segments of society may be used by other segments to achieve identity, dominance, wealth, and prestige. Right. And I'm taking my time because it's like colonialism and capitalism is what Dr. Amos N. Wilson is getting at. Imperialism. This is what he's saying without saying it right here. The criminal activities of one or more segments of society may be used by other segments to achieve identity, dominance, wealth, and prestige. These dominant societal segment classes or groups are often born and bred of the process of repression and impoverishment of the alienated criminal segments or constituents in their social domain. Addicted to the advantages derived from their oppression of the alienated groups, the dominant group comes to depend, whether consciously or unconsciously acknowledged, on such repressive processes as necessary to their continuing relatively peaceful and profitable existence. Their dominance and advantages more often than not rests on the deprivational subordination of the other societal elements. All right. So what Dr. Wilson is saying, colonialism was a criminal act. The expansion of capitalism was a criminal act, but he's going to justify it because he benefits from it. He benefits from colonialism, so he can't indict himself. He has to indict the person. So your resistance to colonialism has to be criminalized. Not me stealing the land, not me enslaving you. You resisting slavery becomes criminal. You trying to escape from slavery. There's something, you're maladjusted. There's something psychologically wrong from you to try to escape from this system. You're not following the rules of colonialism, and slavery is a criminal act. And so we become conditioned to adjust to the system of colonialism, where now there's segments, the masses of people have legitimized the criminal system. We don't even resist and fight the criminal system, despite all of the damage that it's causing throughout the African community, whether you are in Jamaica, Haiti, in the United States, on the continent, Europe, right? This relationship, and this is how they are able to perpetuate their domination over the masses of people around the world. We legitimize the criminal act. And this is why, if you look at like with Cop City, you know, what's happening with them, where I think it's over 60 people who was just indicted. You look at what happened with the Uhuru movement, with Jesse Neville, Penny Hess, and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is currently fighting for their freedom because they were supposed to be working in cahoots with the Russians and working with them in the interest of African people. So at the end of the day, but that's another story. I don't want to get too much into that, but anything, whether it's lawful, even under their own books, whether it's lawful, if it's not in the interest of maintaining the system, is going to be considered criminal. Because again, they're able to interpret. It's all about interpretation at the end of the day. You can say freedom of speech, and we say, hey, we was exercising our freedom of speech. But if the colonizer is saying this particular expression of freedom is a detriment to the maintaining of colonialism, then they will put a limit on that and say, no, this is criminal. That's why freedom of speech is an absolute, right? They said you can't yell a fire in a theater, right, full of people, right? But does it state, is that the only limitation? No, that's just an example, so that they can arbitrarily say, no, what you just did, what you just said, is a violation. Freedom is not covered under freedom of speech. And that is something that we have to be ever conscious of, right? And so you could be made criminal by the people who are in positions of power, even if you are exercising with the constitutional laws of the land says is your rights. So here, addicted to make sure everybody here, addicted to these dominant societal segments, classes, or groups are often born and bred of the process of oppression and impoverishment. Right. So I read that. I'm going to go to this paragraph. The primary gain achieved by the dominant class of society through its repression, denial, distortion, deprivation, and provocation to self-destructive anger is repressed elements, is the creation and enjoyment of a relatively conflict-free, anxiety-free, guilt-free, secure existence buttressed by a tenuous autonomy and control of its environment. Right. The criminal acts that the colonizers' criminal acts against you, the gain from that is the wealth that they receive, is to be able to live in luxury and have some semblance of peace. The secondary gains may include apparent self-preservation, avoidance of responsibility for the state of its repressed elements, material advantages, attention and respect, increased control and influence over other people and the environment, as well as enhancement of itself and social image. Right. And this is another thing. It's just like we do this blueprint for Black Power study on Tuesdays. Make sure that y'all are there because it kind of goes hand in hand. But what the criminal does, Malcolm X talked about this. The media can make an angel look like a devil and the devil look like the angel. The media can make the criminal look like the upholder of law, the civilized person, and make the one who is being oppressed and is the victim of the criminal act look like the criminal. That's what is being said here in essence. This social image, and so they've had centuries. Talking about the European have had centuries to be able to develop ideology and images through the media to justify and rationalize their position of oppression and exploitation and criminality, right? And that's why what we do, and part of this movement, anybody who's a part of any liberation organization or organization fighting for liberation, self-determination, or Black power, we have the language and we have the understanding, but it's important that we give this language and understanding to the masses of African people. And so because they know that there's something fundamentally wrong, but the colonizer is constantly trying to tell them that you're the problem. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You have to get an education, go to these colonial schools and get a good colonial job, All right. And this is why organization is so important, and getting into the community and really building institutions. Very important. So it is the greater glory of the ruling classes that the dominant class of classes, regulators of societal economy, center of societal consciousness and self-consciousness, producer and protector of the societal self and public image, guardian and keeper of the self-serving peace, law, and order, that a societal symptom such as criminality is erected as an altar upon which the repressed classes are ritualistically sacrificed. But the dominant class does not engage in this ritual with a bald-faced, cynical consciousness, for to do so would provoke even in that class self-righteous feelings of self-condemnation and fear of justifiable punishment. In order to escape flagellation by its own bad conscience and escape the need to for its repression and dispossession of its repressed subordinate classes, the egocentric ruling class must, through defensive self-deception and distorting lies, deny its culpability and responsibility for sacrificing for its own self-aggrandizement those same subordinate classes or groups. Right? Have to shift the blame. I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna give you an example. Let me share my screen. I'm going to pull up. There's a guy by the name of Nathaniel Schaller. I think he was some sort of science geologist, scientist. I think a biologist as well, author. But this guy, I came in contact with who Nathaniel Schaller was from reading The Myth of Nations by Robert Sussman. The Myth of Nations talks about this history of eugenics, and so I went to some of the writings of Nathaniel Schaller just to see. Again, that's how when you read, and I'm looking at when I read these secondary texts and or sources, and I'm looking at the sources that they're using. I like to go right to the source, right? So I can develop my own thought and interpretation on the primary material. And so I went to Nathaniel Schaller, and I just want to pull up an example of how the colonizer will develop a sort of thinking or ideology to justify their brutal act towards the other, and in this case towards African people, and shift the blame for this particular article here is called The Negro Problem, where they shift the blame for the Negro problem, or the problem of African people, to the African themselves. And so right here, this is Nathaniel Schaller. He's speaking from America. He's in the United States of America. And so he's talking about Black people in America. He says, this sense of close kinship felt with the Negro may be due to the fact that for many generations, his mind has been externally molded in those of our own race. So here, just to give you some context, Nathaniel Schaller is saying that Africans who went through slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, because they have been separated from African people and been in close contact with Europeans, they are a level above their African brothers and sisters on the continent who have never risen above barbarism, who are heathens and uncivilized. They're saying that the African, though they went through slavery, they still have been in contact, and though they're not equal or on par with Europeans, this removal from the continent of Africa puts them at a better advantage than the African on the continent. And for Nathaniel Schaller, the best solution for African people is to be around the European community, be around Europeans. Because the separation of Blacks from Europeans, what's going to happen is Africans are going to revert back to their barbarism, their barbarous nature, their savage ways. This is Nathaniel Schaller. I'm just giving you some context, right? So he says this, and that's where he's at right now. So he says, I fancy there would be none of it with native Africans. Indeed, I have found little trace of it in intercourse with blacks of the Sea Islands, who represent a people nearer to Africa by several generations and deprived of the close contact with the whites, which would give their minds an external resemblance of those of our own race. When we know the Negro well, we recognize that he differs from our own race in the following respects. The passage from childhood to adulthood age brings in the Negro a more marked and important change in the tone of the mind that it does in the white. In youth, the black children are surprisingly quick. Their quickness can be appreciated only by those who have taught them. But in the pure blacks, with the maturing of the body, the animal nature generally settles down like a cloud on that promise. In our own race, inheritance has brought about a correlation between the complexion of the development and the expansion of the mental powers, so that unless one of our youth distinctly reverts towards some old savagery, the imagination and the reasoning faculties receive a stimulus from the change that this period brings. But with rare exceptions, the reverse is the case with the Negro. At this stage of life, he becomes less intellectual than he was before. The passions cloud and do not irradiate the mind. The inspirational power of the sexual impulses is the greatest gain of our race has made out of all its past. We can hardly hope to impose this feature upon the people. Such treasures cannot be given, however good the will give them. And he goes on and he talks about the inability of African people to come together and build empires and civilizations because they can't form groups. They can't work together. This is in the 1890s that Charlotte is talking about this. But what happens is Charlotte is not talking about how African people are unable to come together because of the divisiveness is a cause or the effect of what Europeans have done, what they have created. They have exacerbated the division between African people, been able to play indigenous people against one another, right? To instigate quarrels between groups of people, and there may have existed some differences, right? And there may have been some decades of conflict between groups of people, right? But there was never this policy of genocide or wiping out their neighbors, though. We all have arguments within our own homes, right? But imagine a group coming along and using one against the other, so that they're able to wipe out another group of people, rid themselves of another group of people. But what happens is that this is what the European does. The European is looking at the African and their inability to be able to rise above their condition as something innately wrong about the African, when really the cause is the relationship that the Africans have with the European. This is the cause. And this is why it's important that we don't fall for this type of propaganda, because if we begin to adopt this sort of thinking, then we'll never solve the problems that we have in our community. And that's going back to this horizontal violence that I have been reading so far. So I'm gonna get back to the book. Personality and Culture. All right. So I'm gonna skim through some of this right here. So personality and culture, like personality, society or culture can be said to possess a modal character or identity and correlated behavior, orientation. Society may also be said to possess a collective consciousness, self-image, and worldview, right? And so now he's going into the collective consciousness of society. So we got to look at the collective consciousness of the European and how they are viewing the other, the African, right? And then the development of this collective consciousness among the African and how they're viewing themselves. In some, the modal character of the society may be said to be a manifestation of the interactive outcome of its intergroup complexes and of its interactive relations with external sources. The nature and character of the interactions between its constituent groups or classes determines to a measurable extent the nature of its social symptoms, such as criminality. Applying somewhat simplistically the psychoanalytical model of personality to social processes, we contend that societies may be usefully perceived as possessing societal groups or class egos. The class ego be usefully perceived as possessing societal group or class ego complexes, and that these group complexes interact dynamically. All right, so right here, Dr. Wilson says a society's ruling and or influential groups, which may be construed to represent its social and societal ego complex, along with their collective perceptions and behavioral styles, dominate what may be called the societal personality. That is, society may be perceived as possessing a central group ego complex, which is the European complex right here. The central group ego complex comprised of its dominant and most influential groups among other group complexes, which there's different complexes, but we're focusing on the complex of Black people, among other group complexes with which it or they influentially interact. The central societal ego group complex evinces a collective consciousness, self-consciousness, and self-image, which it seeks to present as the exclusive and legitimate projections of the societal personality. And if we buy into this this projection, what happens is we want to emulate it, and this is what happens in our community. Appreciate it, and peace to everybody that's on. Appreciate everybody jumping in, out. Continue to like and share the podcast. But this part right here, what happens in our society, is a book. I just had it earlier. I was going to get to it, but I figure I ain't have enough time. It's all over the place. But the Black Anglo-Saxon, I got it somewhere. We'll save that for another day. But Frantz Fanon also talks about this as well, and neo-colonialism is an example of this. But social symptoms such as criminality, its type and distribution, may reflect the outcome of the central group complex attempt to gain and or maintain socioeconomic advantages over the other social groups, which are deprived of social advantages. To reiterate, the societal central complex may be roughly identified as the society's ruling/managing classes, right? The society's ruling/managing classes and other influential groups. In the United States of America, the central societal ego complex is represented by the white American ruling and middle classes and related white groups. These classes and groups generally seek to determine and govern the character and behavior of the societal whole in such ways as to maintain and enhance their wealth, power, and dominance. The activities, resources, powers, and perceptions of the subordinate group complex and less influential social groups are regulated and exploited by the white American community in ways that legitimize and strengthen that ruling complex dominant position. The subordinate group, the African group, ego complex refers to the African American community and related low status groups. As far as the white American community is concerned, the African American community and related groups function to support, function to support and service its dominance. If you're not doing that, then you're in the way. So all your actions, whether you are working for the businesses or companies that are exploiting us, or whether you are going against the society, all of it has to serve a purpose, which is to uphold colonialism. They don't mind the criminality within it. As a matter of fact, they welcome it. They have a whole system in place for it. As a matter of fact, they develop an institution and system within the society to handle the criminality. So by this, the white community legislates, enforces, and reinforces the role, functions, and behavioral boundaries of the African American community in accordance with its dominance needs. By these means, the place of the African American community relative to the white American community is legitimized. Consequently, autonomous displacement by the African American community, labeled illegitimate or illegal by the white American community, may be perceived by that community as threatening its well-being and synonymously the well-being of the societal whole. The well-being of the societal whole, of course, is closely identified with the well-being of the white American community, right? And I was speaking about this purpose when or a function of criminality when I started off. I want to go back to this really quick. I was talking about this strain theory. Let me just read something from this text. This is from this is Understanding Social Problems with various authors. Individuals then must adapt to the inconsistency between means and goals, right? In a society that socializes everyone into wanting the same thing, but provides opportunities only for some. Is that capitalism to its core? I mean, come on. Capitalism is like musical chairs, man. Everybody going around the chairs and the music stops. There's not enough seats for everyone, you know? And somebody gets left out. But under the system of capitalism, there's millions of people who are being left out. And as a result of that, them not being able to, because of the opportunities, there's not enough opportunities purposely too. This is purposely done for everyone. It creates this criminal element within the society. Because if you can't meet those needs, then you're going, hey, I need to provide for myself by any means necessary, right? So if I can't go through this avenue to get it and try to do it the legit way, this is the way that they said I should do it. But because of the obstacles that are put in front of me, that's preventing me to achieve certain things within the society, then I have to do it another way, right? So they're creating the criminals, right? What they call criminals. And very intentional about it. So conformity occurs when individuals accept the culturally defined goals and the socially legitimate means of achieving them. Just think about where we got to think about where we fall in under this. Conformity occurs when individuals accept the culturally defined goals and the socially legitimate means of achieving them. Merton suggested that most individuals, even those who do not have easy access to the means and goals, remain conformists. Innovation occurs when an individual accepts the goals of society, but rejects or lacks the socially legitimate means of achieving them. Innovation, the mode of adaptation most associated with criminal behavior, explains the high rate of crime committed by uneducated and poor individuals who do not have access to legitimate means of achieving the social goals of wealth and power, right? So these are people who they agree with the system. They don't think that the system is oppressive and exploitative, or maybe if they do agree with it, they just accept it for what it is, and they want to take the path of legitimacy, I guess, under the system or the legal route, but there's not enough opportunities for them to do it, or there's obstacles in their way, so they choose other means. So another adaptation is ritualism, in which, for example, individuals accept the lifestyle of hard work, but reject the cultural goal of monetary rewards. Ritualists go through the motions of getting an education and working hard, yet they are not committed to the goal of accumulating wealth or power. And then you have retreatism, involves rejecting both the cultural goal of success and the socially legitimate means of achieving it. Retreatists withdraw or retreat from society and may become alcoholics, drug addicts, or vagrants. And Durkheim talks about this, and this is what Huey P. Newton called reactionary suicide. And then finally, rebellion occurs when individuals reject both culturally defined goals and means and substitute new goals and means. For example, rebels may use social or political activism to replace the goal of personal wealth with the goal of social justice and equality, right? And on and on and on. So there we go. I want to make a few more points before we close this out, that Dr. Wilson is making. So to reiterate, the societal central complex may be roughly identified as the society's ruling managing classes and other influential groups. In the United States of America, the central societal ego complex is represented. Oh, did I read that? By the white American ruling middle class and related white groups, right? So I covered this. I'm gonna go here. The dominant and subordinate societal class complexes in America. White domination, black criminality. So this is going to be the final points that I make here for this chapter 1. Dr. Wilson, he says the perpetual domination of African Americans by white Americans psychically requires the white American criminalization of the African male. That is the white American perception of the African male as inherently criminal. All right, this needs to be made. This is what Schaller was doing. It's something inherent about these people, and Schaller even uses the term experiment in that work. It's called The Negro Problem by Nathaniel Schaller. I encourage you to read it because I think it represents a prevailing, at that time, a prevailing idea or thought about African people, which is going to influence policy towards African people. And I say that time, but I think that it's going to have an influence for generations to come. And so we're at a point in society where this sort of thinking and behavior has been legitimized. We have been conditioned to accept it. I think it's become normalized for most people. Like for some of us, it's clear as day. We like, what the hell? We need to do something about this, and we can call out colonialism. We can call out racism when we see it. And we understand that it's going to be perpetuated unless we do something about it. That there's no amount of voting that's going to get us out of this problem. And we understand that. And so we try to organize and educate. So Dr. Wilson, he goes on to say, for a very large percentage of white Americans, young black males, sexual promiscuity and criminality are synonymous. In the dominant white American consciousness, the African male is existentially guilty. That is, he is guilty by his mere existence for merely having the audacity of being alive. There is a pervasive feeling among many white Americans that their world would be much more secure if all young black males were in prison, solitarily confined to their ghettos, or kept under constant surveillance. It is no quirky coincidence that such perceptions, feelings, and attitudes towards African American males occur most prevalently within the context of white American dominance. Ultimately, criminality of the black male, regardless of its nature, truth or reality, resides in any act or attitude on the part of black males which appears to be white Americans to defy white American authority, control, or dominance. It is white America which defines criminality and writes the criminal justice codes. It writes these codes not in the interest of justice as defined by its own moral code, but in the interest of maintaining, justifying, and enforcing its continued dominance of the African American community. In the interest of maintaining and justifying continuity of the white American community, the African American male, not only readily suspected of committing crimes, but is actively provoked and seduced into criminality by his white American accusers and persecutors. White America's need to dominate a black America creates the need to perceive the African male as criminal and to actualize African male criminality by socializing or ritualizing him into it by dint of judicial witchcraft. Such maneuvers are necessary in order to justify the white American community's repression of African Americans and psychodynamically defend the collective white American eagles complex. I'm sure they feel pretty good. They can just say that the problem lies with the black community. Makes them, they can sleep easier at night that way. I'm going to go down to here, the white American, and this is, and I want to be clear too, like the message, me going through this book and the message that I want to get out, I want to get this out to the masses of African people, especially the element of our community that commit some of the most heinous crimes towards each other and on the African community, because we have to understand what the source of this is, and we have to turn the attack from the African community onto the real enemy, the one who's creating the social environment that is sort of exacerbating the crime that takes place within the Black community. So I just want to be very clear on that, because that's the segment of community that we need to like really transform themselves and not work in the interest of the European colonizer. The white American community must realize, though it will not admit it, that crimes committed in the service of white American domination, the rape and robbery of nations, the murder and exploitation of native peoples and their lands, the denial of humanity of non-European peoples, the enslavement, lynching, racial discrimination against and disenfranchisement of African Americans infinitely outweigh the alleged crimes of African American men, right? These crimes that they have committed and continue to commit outweigh what's taking place in the Black community. But they will never admit it. White American and European denial of their historical criminal subjugation and vicious exploitation of African people and their ongoing defense of their continuing criminal subordination of African peoples have psychically infected the African mind with a variant of white American/European communal psychopathology. Such Eurocentric psychopathology is manifested in Black on Black crime, the subject of this essay. Black male criminality is the stepchild of white male criminality. The white male, in order to enhance and protect his self-image, enjoy the material wealth, power, and political advantages of his criminality, must deny the truth of this reality. Deny the truth and reality. He must not experience the guilty conscience which will result from an acknowledgement and acceptance of his own criminality and psychopathy. His malevolent incrustations must be smoothed over and his criminal draws transmuted to gold. The collective white American ego complex must deny and distort reality if it is to persist in perceiving itself as God's chosen people, as sanctified in the face of its beastification of the African Americans, particularly males, and its thingification of others, right? Because this genocide that's being committed right now, and we have to be very conscious of that, and we have to be able to counterbalance that. If not, then it's going to strike the doom of African people. There's this last thing I want to say is this book is called Criminalizing a Race, Free Blacks During Slavery. This is by Shashi C.L. McIntyre. And I'm just going to read this one paragraph where she says, what I conclude is that the European Americans, deviants, belong in prisons, and to them being African American is a sign of deviancy. I'm going to read that again. What I can conclude is that to European Americans, deviants belong in prisons, and to them being African American is a sign of deviancy. They buttress this impression by projecting an imagery of African ancestral traditions and cultural mores as uncivilized. White supremacists would not address or attack the social conditions which forced free African Americans into the lowest levels of the community. Instead, they cited the oppressive regimes of the slave South or the political disenfranchisement, social prescriptions, and economic depressions of the free North, and attributed these problems to free African Americans' negative potential and criminality. They argued Africans displayed perfect behavior when enslaved, and that freedom caused the Africans to become criminals. Therefore, white reformers suggested removal of all free African Americans as the best solution. Colonization proved too expensive, but the idea of removal remained constant. So prisons serve as alternative removal places. Following this historical overview of their thinking, we see that a direct result of the development and direction of the modern prison system in the formative years of the nation can be found in the contemporary prison patterns. European Americans see African Americans as permanent deviants, and they build prisons to hold deviants, blacks, just like they build ant houses to hold ants. We need to recognize the pattern and provide an analysis that confront that reality. Right? So I'm gonna end it there, man. I want to appreciate everybody that popped in and to join the study. Every Thursday, I'm going to cover a chapter of Dr. Amos N. Wilson's Black on Black Violence, and then as a supplement to the reading to Dr. Amos N. Wilson, his book Understanding Black Adolescent Male Violence, Its Remediation and Prevention. Right, because we want to develop solutions to the problem. We're going to look at that as well. So I look forward to going on this journey, and we're going to endeavor to get through these texts and not just study, but apply the information that we receive. So again, appreciate you all being here. Check us out on Saturday too. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday we'll be back with the podcast, and we're starting a new book on our podcast and book club on Saturdays with Frank and Natasha. And big up to Natasha. She's been working hard organizing for the Curb Fest for political prisoners. That's happening this Saturday in Brooklyn, New York. You can go to Curb Fest on Instagram or curbfest.com to keep up with the various Curb Fests that happens throughout at least the Northeast region. So again, appreciate you all for joining. Until next time, Uhuru and Black Power, and all power to the people.